Northeast, so we're kind of hunkered down here, right? We're hunkered down. You can't really see her that well, but we're hunkered down here, ready for the snowstorm. And I was thinking about a lot of stuff lately. A lot of what I've talked about in the channel as of late has focused on money, or is focused on the system, or is focused on, wealth inequality, or the unfairness of it all, and all that kind of stuff. But that's not how I got here, and that's not where I want to focus all of my time. And because what got me there in the first place was I realized, and I think a lot of us realize, well, I'm not happy with all the places I am in my life. Some places I'm phenomenally happy. I have a wonderful girlfriend, great kids, great grandchildren. I have this wonderful cat, not great grandchildren, good grandchildren, not that old yet. But there's other areas that are like, you know what, I'm not really digging where I am. And one of them was my job. And so there's a lot of things I have to be thankful for, and a lot of things where I'm really, really, fulfilled and happy. And it's important not to lose sight of that. But it's like, man, there's these other areas of my life which aren't really doing it for me. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized a lot of us are in that position. And it doesn't have to be about finances, but there's things in our life that we tolerate, and day after day, and we wish they would change, and we don't do anything about them. And why don't we do anything about them? And I'm not going to give you some hustle culture BS either, because there's a lot of valid reasons, or reasons that make sense once you start dissecting all this, why we aren't making those changes. And I kind of did a deep dive with myself lately, kind of looking at a lot of that. And I found there was a lot of these beliefs that I grew up with in terms of not being good enough, or growing up, poorer than a lot of the other people, where I started to have this mindset that, like, I'm not as good as these other people. I didn't get all the encouragement that other kids did, by their parents and guidance counselors in high school, despite being rather bright. At least I think I'm rather bright. And the hubris, Ivan. And I had it in my head that I can't do the things that other people do, or other people can accomplish more than I can. And, because of that, even to this day, it's really tough to look at, say, like, other jobs, if I wanted to just change my job rather than, doing something for myself and escaping the corporate hell and all that kind of grind. It's hard for me to do that, because there's that voice in my head that says you're not really qualified for that. And I think a lot of us are scared of facing that kind of internal critic, or you get scared of facing the possible confirmation that you're not good enough, because if you try to do something, you could fail. I mean, I'm publicly doing stuff on YouTube now saying, well, hey, I would like to make this part of my income source rather than just talk about RPGs and bass guitar stuff, which is, I'd still like to talk about that too. But I can fail, and I can fail spectacularly, and I can fail publicly, which can be a little uncomfortable. But there's those kind of things that can keep us from doing things that will make our lives better. And but I realized it's not just about money. It's not just about your job and, like, not liking your job. But the thing with the job was, it's not so much about the cash. It's about spending the vast majority of your life doing something that you don't like. Maybe you love your job, in which case, good on you. You've made it. But most people wake up and they're not looking forward to Monday. I know this because I just listen to people in all the facilities I go to, and I listen to people talk about work. And not a lot of people are talking about how stellar it is. A lot of people are, thank God it's Friday and it's hump day, and all the stuff that I don't need to tell you. People aren't really digging spending all those hours at work. Most of them don't love their jobs, but for like 40 some odd years as adults, we spend this huge amount of our time doing something we really would rather not be doing. And then, come home so exhausted from doing that it's very hard. We're spending all our time recovering rather than living life the way we want to. And I noticed that was happening, that I was able to show up. I wasn't able to show up in full capacity to do the things I really wanted to do, because I was just freaking exhausted, and I was mentally burned out from doing that as well, which is one of the reasons I really started to look at, well, what else can I do? And one of those reasons I ended up doing kind of this deep dive, looking at, like, why the hell, not only am I in this position, but, like, tons of people around me are in the same position. and started to realize just how much the current structure of government and the way the laws are in terms of corporations and all that kind of stuff, they promote that. And then wealth inequality, the whole 9 yards. That's not the end all be all. Wealth inequality and the way the government's set up is not the end all be all. It's just noticing that this is something that's an obstacle to living the life that you want. It's that simple. And so what can you do to actually live the life that you want? And I started to realize, that not participating in that way, not participating in the job market in a traditional way, is one of those ways. And this is not the part where I start going all guru and so you buy my course and all BS, because there's plenty of people out there waiting to do that to you. And some of them are quite legit and some of them aren't. But there's other parts of life that, I realize we're not living the way we want to. And it could just be about obligation. I backed away from a lot of obligations that I felt, were really important. Like I needed to do these things. And some of them were family obligations. Some of them were obligations with, with friends or some people in recovery. And some of the obligations were absolutely, positively important. But there were a lot of other ones where I didn't need to take on everything. I didn't need to take on the entire world. Saying no was okay. That, I didn't owe anybody anything. I didn't need to justify my existence or, in the great scheme of transactions, of human interactions, I wasn't always the debtor. But I think very often a lot of us get stuck in that same kind of mindset. And you can see people that are constantly running around, maybe you're one of them, you fulfilling all these obligations. And, there's those moments there when you look at, well, what can I do to live a life that I want? Sometimes you're saying no to those freaking obligations and freeing yourself up from those. The more I looked at the entire puzzle of, here you are living the life that you don't want. Here's the life that you want, how to get there. And none of them are these big giant, like you just wipe the slate clean and do this new thing. It's little actionable steps. I hate to use that term, but these little teeny actions you can use to start to get, make your life look more and more the way that you want it to kind of sculpt it into that condition. And a lot of it's just like saying no to a lot of things because, there's the obligations that are imposed upon us by other people or that we decide we should do for these other people. Then there's all these other things that we just decide we should do. And because, if for whatever reason, maybe there's some things that are like guilt involved, maybe it's going to the gym, every single day, or maybe it's, whatever. We self-impose a lot of these obligations, and then you realize, well, there's not that much time in the day. And then there are, I don't want to go off too much on a tangent here, but sometimes there's just, you can only do so many things. I can only learn so many, learn so many instruments or learn so many songs or pursue so many hobbies before everything gets diluted. And, life is full of choices. And so, we can't do everything. So sometimes, I know enough people that have become overburdened with their own lives that they've got to like cut out some stuff. Well, that's another thing to consider when, because if you have all this stuff, at least for me, if I have all this stuff going on, then I can't really enjoy anything. Maybe it'll be different if I didn't have a job. But, so far I've noticed that I can't possibly pursue everything. And, and then as far as relationships too, there are relationships that we stay in way past the expiration date. Some of them are romantic relationships. Some of those are very difficult to disentangle from. Divorce is messy if you happen to be married. Having kids is messy, so I get, because I've been there and done that, it's very difficult to undo those kind of relationships. And, I had this really eerie experience today. My girlfriend and I went to a restaurant and we see a bunch of people there. The children all look very similar. A lot of the women had these really lovely dresses, but they were dated. And, we're looking like there's no Mennonite churches around here or anything like that. And without going into lots of details, the church was, I found out what church it was. And it was a sort of not a standard, essentially thing that women were under a lot of control. A lot of people have decided this thing is a cult and it's got some nefarious things. But the point is, if these women wanted to leave that relationship, I don't know all the details about it, but it seems like it would be really, really hard. So I understand when I say, here's some things you can do to make your life better. We all come from different places. We all have different obstacles, and sometimes you do need to ask for help, or sometimes, you can say, well, that's easy for you to say, Ivan, and that's true because I'm not in your situation. Um, Having said that, there's other things that can hold us back tremendously, like debt. And I have a good amount of debt right now, and one of my priorities is paying that off. And along with that is developing some kind of savings so I can survive 6 months without a job, which seems insurmountable. But if I don't start putting away now and I don't start hammering down that debt, in 10 years I'll still be 67, whether or not I do those things. So it makes more sense to start to chip away at those things, in order to make life a little easier and more resemble the life that I want. You may find the same sort of thing. If you've got debt, getting rid of that debt. If you don't have a buffer, getting rid of that buffer can really open up a lot of things. Because right now, I'll give you a concrete real world example. One of the reasons I can't leave the job that I don't like is because I have debt, and because I don't have a financial cushion to lean on if I had to leave and then look for another job, or really go gung ho into something where I was opening a business or something. Because I don't have that cushion, and also that job provides me with a company car. It doesn't pay very well, but if you add the company car on top of it, well, there's a lot of stuff, so I'm stuck. And putting myself in a better financial position would mean I was a lot less stuck, which means I have a lot more agency, which means, once again, you're taking steps towards the life that you actually want. What else, Ivan? Because there's the more I thought about it, the more there's so much. As far as, and it can be really simple stuff like clutter. Like I was raised by 2 pack rats. My mom is definitely more of a hoarder. My dad just liked to collect nifty shit, if you will. And I'm somewhere in the middle, but I've got a bunch of stuff. I've gone through it once already. Susan and I are combining households, so she's been through a bunch of her stuff that she's hung on to. But even in just a general living area, I like things to be, organized and kind of sparse and neat, but, I have just created a whole bunch of stuff, like a lot of people have. And there's those times when, it would be much better to get rid of a lot of that stuff, because that would give you the life that you want, or make it much closer to the life that you want. Because I don't know about you, but there's times when I get really frustrated, with crap all over the place, and I'm just kind of throwing stuff off the desk, and why can't I find this or that, or why can't I find my Call of Cthulhu book? The game is going to start in 15 minutes, and it's because I didn't take the steps to make life a little bit easier for myself, which brings it back to well, why don't we do these things? And sometimes it's realizing that you need some kind of tactics. If you're a bit neurodivergent, if you tend to just kind of leave your stuff laying around, naturally, developing some kind of routine or tactics or something, even like a little junk container you put stuff in, when you go into a room, so your keys are going to be in there and all that sort of stuff. There's a lot of little steps that don't seem that important or big, but can make huge, huge changes. Certainly with addiction, I, had to make a humongous change all at once, and that was stopping using. And my quality of life, and it seemed insurmountable. It really did. Not just the not using, but how do I handle life now after being caught out in addiction for so long. And it made a profound difference. And it was very much one day at a time, and one day at a time in terms of doing the things I needed to do in recovery to kind of get my head back together. Having done that for a long time, it's made a huge difference. Once again, it was just something about realizing this is not the life I want, dude. What kind of life do I want instead? And I think we have to, or at least it's been in my experiences, we have to keep on adjusting as life goes on, because we start to realize that something's not working for me. I need to do something different. And there's also those moments that I've discovered where we find ourselves we know what we're supposed to do. We know what we should do. And for some reason, we're just not doing it. And finding out why. And for me, very often, it can come right down to not believing that I can do it or deserve it, or that somehow other people are better than I am. Sometimes it's just not believing that it would work, or just take too much time, or not trusting that would actually do anything for you in the first place. Or there's times when you're just plain old stuck. There are impediments like to like saving up money, for example, or getting out of debt. Figuring out like, well, how do I make more money in the first place? How do I cut spending if I've already got almost nothing that I'm really spending money on? How do I get out of this really controlling and abusive relationship? Or how do I get out of this job that I hate but I'm stuck because of the finances? There's times when we're legitimately stuck and we don't see a way out, and sometimes the best thing you can do is talk to somebody else, because I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but you're talking to your friends or somebody, and they mention a problem they're having and they can't see their way out of it, and you can see the way out of it in like 2 minutes. You can see their blind spots because they're just too close to it. They're too emotionally invested in the problem. And sometimes that's what you need, is to talk to somebody that has your best interest in heart, that can give you a little bit of clarity and say, hey, I think you're underestimating this, or I think you're not considering this, or I think you're dismissing this solution too fast. And I think there's more to it. I think that there's something you can do about that. And I've certainly had to have that happen for me when other people have called me out on being too fatalistic, or not seeing something that seemed obvious, and I probably would have seen it if it was them. Stuff like that's really, really important. But that's where this is probably rambly, but whatever. That's what my focus has really been on lately, is over and over and over again, realizing that people just aren't living the lives that they want to live, and they feel stuck, and they feel like there's nothing they can do about it, or they're pretending like it's not that bad. And that's tragic to me. It's tragic to me that, like, this is your one shot, this is your one time around, and that so many of us, millions of us, are just going to settle for something because we don't believe that we can do anything better, or we're just too tired to do anything to make our lives better, or that we just don't know, or that we don't believe in ourselves, or sometimes we're just not sure what the hell to do, and we need somebody to help us with that. Because there's lots of other people out there that are living the lives that they want. Then so you have to look at, what are the obstacles. A lot of it's money, a lot of it's situational, but a lot of it, I think, is in your here, in the head, and sometimes it's needing to shift the way you approach stuff, and sometimes it is. Like, people wrestle with depression and all this kind of stuff. I'm never going to be here to shame anybody, and a lot of other people that talk about this kind of stuff do. That's not where I'm coming from. I get it, and not to even mention the places. Everybody comes from different places. People are dealing with a lot of discrimination. Whether you're a woman, or like of any number of groups. Some being targeted more than others right now. I get it. People like me are fortunate. So there are definitely a lot of obstacles, but I think. Not discounting any of that or minimizing any of that, but man, this is our one shot. We ought to try as hard as we can to live the lives that we actually want to live, and it doesn't have to be spectacular. It can simply be hanging out with your cat, and reading the kind of books you like, and not spending every waking minute waiting hand and foot on other people, and not saying yes to things you don't want to say no to. If it's just a job, go into a job that like, yeah, this is satisfying. I like this, and not one that just drains your soul, like you just don't care, and you feel like you're just working for the man, putting in your hours, and that sucks. That sucks. Life should be enjoyed, because this is like I said a million times, this is the one you got, and I think you owe it to yourself to do everything you can to make it the best time around, because it's the only time around. You know what I mean? I don't know if any of that made sense, but I figured I'd talk about that.